Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 171, The Beginning of the Tournament. Bang, bang, bang. The sky was still bright when there was a knock on the door. Kant immediately woke up. He turned his head slightly and realized that there was someone standing outside the door. He did not answer. After waiting for a few seconds, he asked, "I'm here. What's the matter?" The person outside spoke. It was a gentle female voice. "Respected Baron Kant, Baron Dylan asked me to bring you clothes. The clothes are for the banquet and the tournament. I hope they fit. If they don't, I'll immediately ask the tailors to modify them." "Okay," Kant nodded, but he did not get up from the bed. "I understand," he casually answered, just like a young noble who lived in luxury. Kant's voice was calm, but it also carried the impatience as he was woke up early. "Let Manad handle it. He should know my figure. If it's not time for breakfast, remember not to disturb me." "Yes, respected Baron Kant," the gentle voice outside the door answered quickly. At the same time, the sound of the door opening was heard. The Sarandian horseman in the next room walked out with an aggressive manner. The owner of the gentle voice was so frightened that she let out an "ah" sound. It was obvious that she was a delicate girl. She had not seen such occasion and had never experienced such a shock. However, Manad said, "Leave." "Yes," Sarandian horseman answered in a deep voice and then closed the door again. Then, Manad comforted her, "You are the new maid, right? I didn't see you last time. Come with me. Don't disturb Lord Kant's sleep. You came a little early." I'm sorry," the soft female voice replied in a trembling voice. The conversation and the footsteps gradually faded away. Kant closed his eyes and revealed a mocking smile, but just only an instant. He was lying on his side comfortably as if he had fallen asleep again. It was another honey trap. This kind of probe really made him felt that it was child's play. But thinking about it, he knew that since ancient times, the only things that could move men were beauty, wealth, and power. Perhaps in this world, they could add strength, but in the end, they were almost the same. He had come into contact with many people from the castle of Leo and the dukedom of Leo. His experience in his previous life made his mind as bright as a lamp. He had the system. He felt a sense of danger in his heart. These little tricks were like a joke that made people laugh. Kant obviously would not be fooled. He closed his eyes and meditated for nearly half an hour before the door was knocked again. At the same time, Manad's voice appeared outside. "Lord Kant, it's almost time for breakfast. If you wake up, we will go to the Lord's Hall in 30 minutes and have breakfast with Baron Dylan and his vassal knights." "I understand," Kant replied in a lazy voice. Manad also said, "These are your clothes. Baron Dylan sent you to wear them at the banquet." "Well, Uncle Dylan is thoughtful," Kant nodded. He lifted the velvet silky quilt and sat on the bed in his pajamas. He said to Manad, "Come in. Put my clothes on the table." The door was pushed open. Manad walked in. He was also wearing a well-fitting gentleman's suit. He was holding 2 sets of more gorgeous clothes in his hands. They seemed to be made of velvet, fine linen, and wool. Kant took them and put them on. The common noble's clothes in the dukedom of Leo were red and blue. "They fit you very well," Manad praised. "Lord Kant, you look quite heroic." "I like that word," Kant nodded and smiled. After washing up a little, he walked out of the room. The 10 Sarandian horsemen outside also finished their preparations and were waiting in formation. Kant said to Manad, "Lead the way. Let's go to the Hall of the Lord. We absolutely cannot let Uncle Dylan go ahead of us. After all, I am a junior. We need to go ahead of him to show some respect." "You are right," Manad nodded and led the way. Soon, they arrived at the hall. However, there were already vassal knights arrived first. Few groups of them formed small circles around each other and were talking excitedly. The topic of course was about the tournament. When they saw Kant and the others coming over, all of them lowered their heads to pay their respects. However, when they looked at the Sarandian horsemen behind Kant, their eyes became even more fiery. It was like they had seen their lifelong opponent and wished that they could have a battle in the hall. They wanted to beat the opponent to the ground and show off their valiant side. Cough cough. Baron Dillon let out a light cough and entered into the hall. The vassal knights hurriedly saluted and greeted him. Baron Dillon nodded, but when he looked at Kant, he smiled. Little Kant, this outfit fits very well. It looks really good. You looks much more handsome than when I was 16 years old. You flatter me. Kant quickly lowered his head in gratitude. This junior's attitude was very good. It was all thanks to your help that I left Castle of Le. His tone was a little depressed and angry. My previous clothes were all taken. Other than a few limited pieces, there are almost no clothes that can be worn at banquets and competitive events. Don't talk about that. It's all in the past. Baron Dillon's eyes were a little proud. Didn't he give Kant the clothes to show that he was trying to win him over and be friendly? Baron Dillon sneered in his heart, especially when he looked at Kant's young face. A certain throb was shaking in his heart. This son of Princess Sophia was in fact the abandoned child of the Silver Platter Kingdom. If he could use this opportunity to reconnect with those hidden forces, or even directly replace them after he reached a high position, becoming the spokesperson of the Silver Platter Kingdom in the Dukedom of Leo. In addition to the help of the table salt trade, he might be able to develop further. Let's start breakfast. The banquet at noon and the tournament in the afternoon will definitely be more lively. Baron Dillon's face remained calm. He still had a bright smile on his face, and he even extended his hand to invite Kant. He looked very free and easy. This is the greatest courtesy I can give you. We are the closest relative, and we are also close neighbors. We should be even closer in the future. You are right, Uncle Dillon. Kant put on a big, bright smile. Breakfast officially began. But this breakfast was very well prepared, like a grand banquet. The candlesticks were filled with candles. Although it was daytime, the dim fortress building made it impossible for the light to shine in. They could only use other means to make the hall brighter, making it seem as bright as the daytime outside. At the same time, there were many candlesticks and many burning candles. It also meant that the lord's wealth and strength were strong, and it could reflect the dignity of a noble. Baron Dillon had received a large amount of great silver coins. He would not be as stingy as before. Breakfast was quickly over. He invited Kant into the reception room to chat. The servants took the opportunity to hang up a large number of velvet flags. Baron Dillon's badge was on those flags. The pattern was made of a sword and a shield. It meant that he was a baron who had just been promoted of his battle achievements, and it was a symbol of military strength. However, this flag could only be hung proudly in the remote northern county. If it was hung in the southern county, those blossoms of flags that represented the 100-year-old or 1,000-year-old families were even more magnificent. A simple and crude flag with sword and shield on it was too embarrassing to hang out. However, in the barren northern county, the baron's flag could already be considered noble. Whether it was the warrior noble or the palace noble, they all had to display their glory and power in front of the merchants and landlords. Before noon, the Lord Hall had been decorated with velvet and various handicrafts. The long table was also decorated with a new tablecloth. It was made of the finest linen and was filled with fine silver cutlery. Under the illumination of the inferior beeswax candles on the candlestick, it sparkled and dazzled the eyes of the gentlemen and celebrities who came. Although they were gentries and celebrities, their fame were only limited to the northern county. Compared to the truly wealthy people in the southern county, they were much worse. Moreover, they were all swallowing their saliva in their hearts after seeing all these silver tableware. If the event was not held in the residence of the infamous brutally and fiercely Baron Dillon, and that the guests were all locals, they would definitely steal 1 or 2 silver cutlery or small bowls. This was very common in large-scale banquets and tournament events. After all, no one could resist these silver luxury items. These luxury tableware were all silver coins. At noon, the banquet was held as scheduled. The celebrities and gentries at the Stone Pass laughed and chatted in the Lord Hall. They looked very happy. But most people were absent-minded about this. They were most concerned about the tournament that would be held in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the vassal knights were also talking to each other. They were eating the food on the table, but didn't really enjoy the taste in their mouths. Especially when they saw the Sarandian horsemen standing at the corner in a group, they were irritated. Finally, it was almost time. The crisp bell rang. The joyous chubby butler stood in the center and said, "Everyone, the banquet was held successfully. Next, Baron Dillon would like to announce something. Everyone, please be quiet." Everyone in the Lord Hall immediately looked at the high platform in the middle. And Baron Dillon walked up. The crowds gave a warm applause immediately, and everyone looked at him eagerly. "Thank you all for coming to this banquet." Baron Dillon had a smile on his face. The bearing of the noble Baron was unquestionable. "In order to welcome my dear nephew, the Lord of the Naran Desert, Baron Kant, there will be a tournament held at the Stone Pass in the afternoon. Everyone will be able to participate. As for the top 3 winners, I will give out 100 great silver coins, 50 great silver coins, and 20 great silver coins respectively." "Oh!" the people below cried out in surprise. However, their eyes lit up even more. Especially those vassal knights, their breathing quickened. Even though they were gentries and celebrities of the North County, they were unable to earn 20 great silver coins in a year, let alone 100 great silver coins. Thinking back to that time, the 20 personal cavalries from the southern county were willing to sacrifice their lives for 20 great silver coins. Although it was because of Kant giving up the last of his drinking water, the value of 20 great silver coins was unquestionable. One had to know that in this world, the poor were still in the stage of bartering. For those who able to use small silver coins to trade, they were at least wealthy free citizens. As for great silver coins, they were used among the lords, merchants and landlords to trade. Ordinary civilians probably had never seen a great silver coins in their entire lives. It was even more impossible for them to possess these coins. Chapter 172, Mother's Secret. The tournament had yet to begin, and the discussion had already become quite lively. This was a rarely seen event in the Stone Pass for several years. Thinking back, the last time they had such a large-scale tournament held in the Stone Pass was when Baron Dillon had just obtained the title of Baron and become the lord of this place. It had already been a full 10 years since then. As for the tournament that excited the entire northern county, only Viscount Wayne, who replaced Archduke Cameron and ruled the entire northern county, could hold such tournament once every 3 years in his Logue castle. After all, the cost of holding a competition was not something an ordinary lord could afford. The banquet was announced to be over in the afternoon. Everyone left the Lord Hall of the official residence, followed the carpet prepared by the servants, and walked up the spiral staircase. They came to the south side of the city wall. There was a 10-meter wide area of the city wall that was close to the mountain wall and the official residence that was embedded into the mountain rock. It was the viewing platform that was built to watch the tournament. The following tournament was held in the square on the south side of the city wall. One could see very clearly when sat on the 7-meter high viewing platform. Any discussion would not affect the tournament in the square below. Early in the morning, the servants had already prepared linen sun-shading tents in advance, using hemp ropes to hang them above their heads to block the scorching sun. The gentle mountain breeze brought a slight coldness. Although it was close to the Naran Desert, the Sinway Range always had a cold current gushing out of the ground. So it could neutralize the heat waves coming from the desert and allow plants and animals to thrive in the mountains. It became a natural hunting ground for the villages in the Stone Pass. Scholars and mages from the Dukedom of Leo had jointly investigated the Sinway Range. They had made a conclusion. The conclusion was that the cold current in the Sinway Range belonged to negative energy, and long-term contact with the cold current would be harmful to animals and plants. However, the temperature of the Naran desert, which contained positive energy and fire energy, had washed away the negative energy over a long period of time, so that the Sinway range was safe. Even so, the number of demonized creatures in the Sinway range was dozens of times more than in other areas. Hunting teams of the villages often encountered them, or these creatures would rush into logging fields and quarries. Knights had to step up their rescue efforts to suppress them. However, the vassal knights and the celebrities, who were currently on the viewing platform, didn't care about this matter. They had already lived in the Stone Pass for 10 years. Some villages and clans in the Stone Pass had been existed for hundreds of years. No demonized creatures had rushed down from the mountain range. On the contrary, those jack-allans from the Naran desert had caused more damage. Now, with the fortress of the Stone Pass, there were many regular troops and more than 20 knights stationed there. It was absolutely safe. Compared to this problem, the landlords and merchants all brought their best children to come here. They were tried to get close to those vassal knights as they were promoting their children to become the attendants of these knights. These vassal knights were also willing to talk to these rich and powerful landlords and merchants. The overall atmosphere was very harmonious. Although knights were nothing in the eyes of the real noble. However, knights were still part of the noble's reserve force, and they had a chance to become a noble themselves. After all, there was a slang in the dukedom of Leo: knights could not be noble, but nobles were definitely knights. After all, the dukedom of Leo was built on combat strength. The high-end troop class of knights was listed as a class. The other human dukedom were similar. That was why these landlords and merchants were so keen to let their children know knights. Once they were accepted as attendants, they had the possibility to become knights and even had the qualifications to become a noble. If a knight was said to be a noble's reserve force, then a knight's attendant was a knight's reserve force. Kant and Baron Dillon stood at the side of the viewing platform. There were no many annoying merchants and landlords around them. Only Manit and 2 close vassal knights accompanied them. They smiled and chatted with each other happily. The tournament was still being prepared. However, just outside the city walls, the footmen wearing iron scale armor had already sealed off the square. There were already more crowds waiting around. After all, the tournament was not usually the entertainment for the noble, but it was the entertainment for the civilians. Many residents of the Stone Pass had specially come to watch this once-in-a-few-years event. The residents whispered to each other, and the avenue were also filled with noisy crowds. There were even many small vendors found their business opportunity. They were selling a lot of snacks with rattan baskets. Most of them were fruit platters made of wild apples from the mountains mixed with other wild fruits. They were placed in simple wooden bowls. One small silver coin could buy a large portion. The residents lived in the Stone Pass often had the spare money to buy snacks. Very soon, these small vendors made a lot of money. At such a grand event, everyone was happy to spend money. Even the butler on the viewing platform sent people down to buy a few rattan baskets. They threw away the wooden bowls and replaced them with more exquisite silver bowls. They put them on the wooden table on the viewing platform for people to eat and drink. At the same time, various cakes were brought up and placed on the table. There was sweet wine diluted with honey, water, and malt liquor. There were also freshly squeezed lime juice and fruit juice drinks mixed with honey and water. They were all placed on the viewing platform in barrels. After all, those who could come to the viewing platform were all respectable people who had received invitations. Ordinary small merchants and small landlords could not receive this invitation. They could only squeeze together with the crowd outside the city wall, which was under the viewing platform. It's really lively. Kant held a silver wine glass in his hand and could not help but sigh. Baron Dillon smiled and nodded. This was specially arranged to welcome your arrival. Thank you very much, Uncle Dillon, Kant thanked him gratefully. At the same time, he raised the silver wine glass slightly as if he was toasting. He took a sip of the malt wine mixed with lime juice. He could not help but sigh. He smiled bitterly and said, "It's been a long time since I participated in the tournament." Baron Dillon looked at Kant's elegant action, and there was jealousy in his eyes. Only a noble child who was trained since young age could have such calmness and elegance. But soon, Baron Dillon's heart regained its peace. Looking at Kant's sad look, the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile, and there was a hint of self-satisfaction in his eyes. So what if Kant was elegant and calm? Kant still had to respect him so much. He even addressed him as you politely and called him uncle. One had to know if Kant was really still the eldest son of the Grand Duke. If this was the South County territory of the dukedom. Just the way he addressed him as uncle was probably enough to attract the most severe reprimand from the castle of Leo. But now, he, Dillon, a noble warrior who was originally looked down by everyone, was able to become the uncle of the eldest son of Grand Duke Cameron. He was able to stand in front of Kant and accept his proper address. "You seem to have thought of something unpleasant." Baron Dillon chuckled. He said firmly to Kant, "You can tell me. No matter what, I will still be your strongest support. If there are any problems, I will settle them for you. In the name of Princess Sophia, I once swore my loyalty to her. As for you, who belongs to her bloodline, I will also do my best." "You make me feel at ease, Uncle Dillon." Kant lowered his head and shook his head slightly with a bitter smile. He was like a lost child. He sighed softly and said, "I was once not qualified to participate in the tournament of Castle of Leo. Even if I could go, I could only stay below and watch my father and brother on the viewing platform, but they could not see me in the crowd at all." Dillon's eyes showed a slight of smug. He even tried to sow discord in a calm tone. "It doesn't matter. Now that you have your own estate and control the salt mine, why do you have to listen to their arrangements? You can live more like yourself, just like your mother. You have your own opinions and don't rely on others too much, because she herself yielded the power to control the country." "My mother?" Kant seemed to be very curious. "That's right," Baron Dillon sighed slightly. "Princess Sophia once controlled the powerful Silver Light Knights, but after your mother passed away, this Knights group disbanded." Kant was slightly stunned. This had never been recorded in history or in those books. Once in the academy, Kant had specifically looked up the records of his mother, in order to look for clues. His goal was also to use the forces that his mother had left behind to give him of some support. At least, he could live a less depressing life before the golden finger materialized. However, no matter how hard he searched, he could not find any records of his mother. He only knew that she was the second wife of Grand Duke Cameron. After she died due to sudden illness, all of her records had lost. From the looks of it, it seemed that someone had deliberately erased all the records of his mother. Just looked at the noble families of the Dukedom of Leo, Kant's mother was like a taboo topics, they were only allowed to talk about her in this remote place. Even in the academy with a strong academic atmosphere, the topics of his mother, Princess Sophia, was not allowed to discuss at all. Thinking about it carefully, even some teachers deliberately did not lend Kant some books. It seemed that it was because of this hidden reason. Some people wanted Princess Sophia to disappear and completely block off this news to Kant, so as to avoid any accidents or touched on some secrets that should not be told. Just like the current Silver Light Knights. Kant knew nothing about this. "If you have the help of the Silver Light Knights, I think those Jack Allens are no match for you." Baron Dillon also seemed to sigh. Looking at Kant beside him, he said in a nostalgic manner, "It is said that the Order of Silver Light Knights are made up of 1,000 highly skilled knights, and the highest commander is 10 Grand Knights who have grasped extraordinary powers. They are really powerful." 10 Grand Knights. Kant was slightly stunned. If it was based on his understanding of Grand Knights, it would indeed be extremely terrifying. Chapter 173, Boring Tournament. Kant swallowed his saliva and said, "A knight order led by 10 Grand Knights. What a pity." His tone was still a little disappointed, but he raised his head and smiled. Although I don't know about the Silver Light Knights, I still have the help of others. After a pause, Kant's tone was still firm. He expressed his thought, I think they are not inferior to the Silver Light Knights. Baron Dillon glanced at a corner of the viewing platform on the city wall. 10 Sarandian horsemen were standing there and talking happily. It was like they formed a self-organized system, a circle that rejected outsiders. Even if there were landlords and merchants wanted to take their children to try their luck, they were rejected after a few words. Before long, all the merchants knew that these seemingly gentle but actually cold horsemen were not so easy to get close to. Baron Dillon understood in his heart. He would replace the forces Kant had mentioned, as well as the 10 Sarandian horsemen who had obviously been trained by knights, into the forces left behind by Princess Sophia. He smiled lightly and his eyes were filled with fear and craze. If he could return to the hidden forces and replace them, perhaps he would have his place in the entire dukedom of Leo. It was precisely because Baron Dillon was one of the forces that Princess Sophia had brought back then. He knew the true intention of Princess Sophia was to subvert and control the political situation of the dukedom of Leo. In fact, after gathering small half of the Silver Platter Kingdom forces, she was truly capable of changing the current situation of this country. Or rather, they had the power to subvert the entire country. After understanding this situation, Baron Dillon became even more passionate towards Kant. However, he could not hide the greed in the depths of his eyes. In Baron Dillon's eyes, Kant was just like a silly and sweet little child who knew nothing. He called him Uncle Dillon friendly and sincerely, as if he truly regarded this Baron as the only person he could rely on at the moment. However, there was an imperceptible mockery in Kant's smile. He had lived 2 lives. Kant was not a fool. Just as the two of them were still talking, the tournament below finally began. The chubby butler walked over quickly with a sheepskin scroll in his hand. On it, there were dense words written with a quill pen. He handed it to Baron Dillon, and reported, "Lord, everything is ready. The children of the gentry's family will start first." It was the first part of the tournament segment to warm up the audience. "Just make the arrangements." Baron Dillon waved his hand and did not take the sheepskin scroll. Instead, he looked at the chubby butler, who had followed him for many years. He solemnly instructed him, "Don't embarrass me. This is a competition held to welcome little Kant. If anything goes wrong, I will be angry." "Absolutely not," the chubby butler immediately broke out in cold sweat. "Humph, that's good." Baron Dillon's expression softened slightly. Following the arrangements, many merchants and children of the landlords on the viewing platform quickly left. They walked down the stairs to the city wall and changed into their weapons and equipment for the tournament. They walked side by side to the square and respectfully greeted Baron Dillon. Baron Dillon also waved his hand slightly, indicating that the tournament would start first. The crowds below immediately cheered. These competitors were wearing leather armor and holding wooden spears, shields, and swords. They quickly broke out into fight. As many competitors moved around, it could be seen that there were 2 teams of 20 competitors fighting each other. It seemed like they were simulating the attack of the military formation. They fought back and forth. It looked quite hot-blooded. The civilians below also let out deafening cheers, which quickly ignited the atmosphere. This kind of tournament was one of the few grand banquets they had. Baron Dillon also expressed his satisfaction. He smiled and turned to Kant and praised, "These children are the sons of merchants and landlords. It seems that in a few years, they will become experienced warriors. If some of them have strong awareness and training, they can even become knights' attendants. I think highly of them." "I think they are very good," Kant nodded in agreement. "These are all very good young men," Baron Dillon nodded proudly. However, in Kant's eyes, these competitors below were fighting back and forth in groups, and then they scattered to find another opponents to fight one-on-one after a short while. There was no entertainment at all. It was far inferior to the competition in Castle of Leo, not to mention the blockbuster in his previous life. They were not on the same level at all. He turned his head and looked at the merchants and landlords around him. As well as those vassal knights, they were all watching with great interest. With a slight frown, Kant could not tell what battle techniques these young people had. They were simply chopping each other with wooden swords and stabbing each other with wooden spears. Occasionally, they would hit each other with shield strikes. It was as if they were children playing house. However, he did not show it on his face. He was still pretended to be quite enthusiastic. Soon, as a certain team was defeated, the battle was paused for a moment. The losers left the arena. The winners raised their head arrogantly and stood on the arena to show their victory. The civilians below burst into enthusiastic cheers. Even on the viewing platform, many merchants and landlords were talking excitedly about their children's actions just now. Of course, the families of the defeated deliberately did not speak a word. Losing the battle was not something that people were willing to accept. At this moment, Baron Dillon opened his mouth. He swept his gaze over the merchants and landlords and smiled. The winners will be rewarded with 1 great silver coin each. Thank you, the kind Baron Dillon. Immediately, there were people with smiles on their faces who quickly bowed to him. Some people had bitter smiles on their faces. Obviously, they were happy to be the family members of the victors. The ones with bitter smiles were the family members of the defeated. In response to this, Baron Dillon continued to smile. At the same time, he continued, in the name of little Kant, give the defeated a reward of 50 small silver coins as a reward for their unyielding performance in the arena. Thank you, kind Baron Kant. The merchants and landlords who had bitter expressions on their faces before immediately revealed a joyful look. They immediately bowed to Baron Dillon and Kant to express their gratitude. The consolation prize was not low, and they were quite satisfied. The most important thing was that they would not lose their faces too much because of failure. Uncle Dillon, you are too generous, Kant also bowed his head to express his gratitude. After all, these small silver coins were given to those people in his name. Baron Dillon smiled proudly and shook his head. Don't care too much, little Kant. As long as you are in my estate, then it will be just like your home, as long as you are happy. Kant continued to lower his head to express his gratitude. He acted like a young noble who was deeply touched, as if he did not have any schemes or tricks. If one treated him better, he would willing to open his heart. The square below was filled with people. Another 2 teams of competitors appeared. It was still those young people, but they were all new players. They continued to fight in a mess. Kant was speechless, but he still had a smile on his face. The winners of the last 2 teams continued to fight to determine the final winning team. This time, Baron Dillon was very generous. He had rewarded each of them with 5 great silver coins. It was almost equal to the income of these merchants and landlords for many months. The cheers became louder and louder. The commoners below were extremely excited even if they were just watching the show. The competition reached its climax. At this moment, the butler walked over and said with a smile, Lord Dillon, it's time for the knights to compete. I think it will be very exciting. This was the real climax. The vassal knights who had actual combat experience would be more fun to watch. Okay, said Baron Dillon with a smile. However, he also thought of something and turned to Kant. My knights already know their level. Why don't you ask your guards to go as well? My guards? Kant was slightly stunned. That's right, said Baron Dillon with a smile. You brought 40 guards with you, so you can definitely select 20 people to form 2 teams. Kant lowered his head apologetically. That's not very good. There's nothing bad about it. I said it. Baron Dillon smiled and patted Kant on the shoulder. He said earnestly, look at your guards. They are all strong and fit. They are more than enough to be knights' attendants. They can also play in the tournament, not fight on the battlefield. Then. Okay, Kant nodded. This tournament will be even more exciting, Baron Dillon smiled happily. As the order was given. The 20 Sarandian horsemen, who were still waiting under the city wall, were immediately transferred to the arena outside. They also changed into leather armor, wooden swords, wooden spears, and wooden shields. However, just by looking at their robust appearance and the imposing manner when they walked, one could tell that they were not at the same level as the children of the merchants and the landlords. The true elite warriors, even the civilians below could see it. The cheers were even louder. At the same time, the vassal knights from the Stone Pass also appeared. The 20 vassal knights also formed 2 teams, each of them rubbing their fists and palms. Looking at the Sarandian horsemen, it seemed like they wanted to teach this group of outsiders a lesson. They all looked over provocatively, winking at each other, wanting to provoke the other party. However, the Sarandian horseman's face remained cold and calm. This made the vassal knights a little angry. Provoking the other party, but the other party completely ignored you. It was like they were looking down on you. One by one, they whispered to each other, saying in a low voice that they would definitely teach these guys a lesson later. The first team of guards from Lord Kant will compete with the first team of cavalry from the Stone Pass. A servant on the viewing platform of the city wall loudly announced the rules. His voice was loud and clear, and even the civilians below could hear him clearly. You are not allowed to cause fatal injuries, and you are not allowed to make serious injuries that cause sequela. The tournament is based on the competition, and it cannot be treated as a battle on the battlefield. I hope you can understand. Understood, the 20 Sarandian horsemen calmly replied. Don't be long-winded. Let's begin. However, the knights were a little impatient. Their status was higher than these servants. Thus, their tone was not polite at all. Seeing this, Baron Dillon frowned slightly. However, he still smiled and said to Kant, "Your guards are really not bad. They are just like well-trained knights. Compared to my vassals, the difference is really too big. They are more like a real noble knight and a group of wandering knight." Chapter 174, Complete silence on the scene. It was obvious that Baron Dillon was drooling over Kant's Sarandian horsemen. Completely obedient to the order. This motto may look simple and comprehensible. However, for these troops in the era of cold weapons, as long as they could follow this motto, they could be considered as elites. This was because this motto represented discipline, a discipline that should be strictly obeyed in military operations. They are all good, Kant seemed to be smiling modestly. However, this deepened Baron Dillon's guess that Kant had a force behind him to help him. If there was no force to help him, then how could these 40 completely obedient knight-level guards follow an exiled baron, who had lost the love of his family and was struggling to survive in the desolate desert? If he went to seek refuge with any noble, he would be able to obtain even more. It really makes me drool. What kind of great power does the legacy of Princess Sophia have? This thought arose in Baron Dillon's mind. His eyes were filled with fanaticism and stared straight into Kant's eyes. Then, 2 teams were ready at the arena which located at the bottom of the city wall. The 10 vassal knights on the left and the 10 Sarandian horsemen on the right. They were not riding horses. Instead, they were walking for the sake of convenience. After all, the size of the entire arena was not large. If all 20 of them were to ride horses, they would not be able to display their powers. If they wanted to watch the horsemen charge at each other on horses, involved only 2 competitors were the best choice. It's about to begin. Baron Dillon's eyes were filled with satisfaction. Although these vassal knights looked undisciplined, they were indeed had capability and worth kept by him. There were many monsters in the Sceneway range. Even the low-level Jack Allen tribe would attack from time to time. Usually, they relied on these knights to lead their teams to deal with the monsters. If they did not have some ability, they would have died in the Sceneway range. If they were able to live until now, their ability could not be underestimated. Kant was silent. He also had some doubts about his 10 Sarandian horsemen. After all, they were all level 4 troop class. If the level 5 Mamluk was here, he might still have a chance. After all, these level 5 troop class were the strongest force that Kant could have at the moment. Compared to the level 4 troop class, they were qualitatively better. You don't seem to have confidence in your guards. Baron Dillon smiled and comforted him, don't worry, this is just a tournament. Of course, Kant smiled and shook his head. Just below, as both sides were ready, the servant responsible for the shouting repeated the rules. Then, he raised the flag in his hand and waved it down heavily. Begin. The battle officially began. The originally hyped crowd was very focused on the two teams in the arena. Even the retired rookies were watching solemnly. This was a competition of the true knights. As long as they learned a few useful techniques from watching, it would be of great help to them in the future, and it would be more beneficial to their growth. However, the expected collision did not happen. The 10 Sarandian horsemen stood shoulder to shoulder, holding shields in their left hand and spears in their right hand. They carefully moved forward in formation, but their speed was not fast. It was just like the most common formation of the long lance soldiers. It made the vassal knights who had spread out and rushed forward a few steps, a little stunned. They had no concept of formation to begin with. In their impression, in such a tournament or even on a real battlefield, only footmen would form a formation like this. These knights usually led their troops to charge at the front to show their bravery. They used their powerful combat skills to lead their troops to tear open a hole in the enemy's formation as the final breakthrough point. However, in a battle on foot, charging forward in a mess was not that heroic, especially when the enemy had formed a formation like a tight turtle shell. If they charged forward, it might not be optimistic. Hey, are you guys violating the rules? Why are you all gathered together? Come out and fight us one-on-one. Are you guys cowards? If you're so timid, people will look down on you. The vassal knights used insulting tone to provoke the Sarandian horsemen. However, the 10 Sarandian horsemen did not move. They continued to move forward slowly, holding 10 2-meter-long wooden spears in their hands as they slowly approached the scattered vassal knights. There was no expression on their cold faces, as though they did not care about the insults. Fight! Fight! Don't dawdle! There were people shouting from below. There were many of the residents were waving their fists fervently. Obviously, these knights moving forward slowly and testing each other was not what they wanted to see. Even on the city wall, many merchants and landlords were frowning. Even Baron Dillon smiled and said to Kant, "Little Kant, it seems that your soldiers are very cautious. I don't know much about them either." Kant timely showed his ignorance. But he still smiled and said, "But when they killed the Jack Allens, they were very powerful. Basically, 10 people riding horses could chase after hundreds of Jack Allens, and they could even win." Well, Baron Dillon nodded and didn't say anything. In his opinion, his vassal knights could also do it, so it wasn't a big deal. However, at this moment, the 10 Sarandian horsemen under the city wall seemed to have come to an agreement. They immediately rushed forward for about 10 meters within few steps. Meanwhile, the vassal knights were still standing in a mess, each holding a wooden sword and a wooden spear. They were not prepared at all. They could only retreat in shock, but they could not dodge the 10 wooden spears that were thrusting straight at them. The tip of the wooden spears was not made of iron, but was made of wood. It did not have a sharp edge. However, it still caused a little pain when it stabbed someone's body. Moreover, the attacks of the Sarandian horsemen were caught off guard and were not noticed by the vassal knights at all. They hurriedly let go and retreated to both sides. However, there were still 2 or 3 people who were unable to dodge in time. They were stabbed in the back of their waists or stomachs by the tip of the spears and announced their lost. They did not react in time and just stood in the arena in a daze. Even the people around them did not react in time. On the city wall, Baron Dillon still had a smile on his face, but this smile was frozen on his face. Looking at the vassal knights who had been completely scattered and chased by the Sarandian horsemen in the arena, his face suddenly turned red. Kant did not say anything. He just looked down quietly. Soon, the vassal knights who had been defeated were all declared defeated. Lord Kant's guards have won. The servants hesitated. They looked at the vicious gazes of the vassal knights, but they still helplessly said this result. After all, it was the vassal knights who had been defeated, not the Sarandian horsemen. This isn't fair. The vassal knights flew into a rage out of humiliation. One after another, they shouted, "How can they fought like this on the arena? They should show off their strength in a fair way." They were all saying similar words as they raised their heads to look at the viewing platform. "That's right, this isn't fair. Request for a rematch. They can't do this. We want to watch an exciting match, not something as boring as this. Cheating, this is cheating." The audience made up of civilians also protested, saying that the Sarandian horseman was cheating. In the arena, it was impossible to compete like this. It should be like a real man, fighting head on head. Baron Dylan also turned his head slightly to look at Kant. Hearing the people shouting for the rematch, his expression recovered a little. He teased, "Little Kant, your guards seem to treat the arena as a battlefield." "I'm not sure either." Kant still did not know anything. He scratched his head and said, "Maybe they don't know." "Then let's fight one-on-one." Baron Dylan smiled and made the decision. He did not have any intention of letting Kant choose. Soon, this decision was made, and the people below immediately cheered. The vassal knights also issued a challenge. However, the Sarandian horsemen remained expressionless, just like the everlasting Sarandian desert. No matter how the wind blew, they waited. In the arena, two people appeared once again. They were a Sarandian horseman and a vassal knight. Each of them held a wooden shield and a wooden spear, with a wooden sword in their arms. "Hey, I will crush you under my butt." The vassal knight was provoking him. However, the Sarandian horseman did not care at all. The vassal knight in front of him lowered his body slightly and blocked the wooden shield in front of him. The wooden spear in his hand was like a poisonous snake hiding behind the shield. The skills of the Sarandian people had been honed on the battlefield and in their families. They were the tribe in the desert. If they stayed desert forever and ate dust, then the heroic acts of conquering or expelling other races and monopolizing the resources of the Oasis would have long disappeared in history. They would not be ruling the Sarandian desert like they were doing now, or spread their forces toward the continent of Karadia. "Begin." The servant immediately waved down the banner. The people below were all shouting, cheering for their vassal knights. "Defeat the outsiders. Go. Let him know how powerful the stone pass is. You are the strongest Lord Knight." The cheers were very hyped and joyous. It caused the vassal knight to have a confident smile on his face. This was the confidence that came from killing several powerful demonized creatures in the Sinway range. "Look at my spear," he shouted as he quickly thrust forward. The spear in his hand seemed to be ready to pierce through the Sarandian horseman at any moment. However, the Sarandian horseman still lowered his body. He looked at the rapidly approaching spear. He immediately turned around and raised the shield in his left hand diagonally, blocking the direction where the spear was coming from. Borrowing the force of the spear, he raised it upwards, while the spear in his right hand was placed flat on his waist and stabbed into the abdomen of the vassal knight. It took less than 10 seconds. The citizens who were cheering and demanding to beat up the Sarandian horsemen were like ducks being choked by the throats now. Their faces were flushed red, their eyes were wide open and they did not make a sound. Even the viewing platform suddenly became cold and silent. After a long while, "This is impossible." Finally, a merchant opened his mouth with a shocked expression. He recalled that this vassal knight once killed a demonized creature with ease. He stabbed that demonized creature from its mouth to its spine with his spear. He even stabbed the demonized creature from its butt. It howled for quite a while before it died miserably. But now this defeated vassal knight was just standing on the ground in shock. Chapter 175, The Knight Who Suddenly Arrived. But this vassal knight who was known for his bravery was defeated just like that. He lowered his head in a daze. Looking at the wooden spear that was pressed against his lower abdomen, he had a stunned expression on his face. He simply could not imagine that he would be defeated so easily. The stunned crowds around him and the silence on the viewing platform on the city wall made him feel ashamed and salty. It immediately turned into anger and he howled when he took half a step back. He stretched out his hand to grab the wooden spear that was pressed against him and ferociously charged forward. He wanted to use the shield in his hand to smash against that poker face. How can I lose? His eyes were filled with hatred. However, what welcomed him was not victory, but the agile turn of the Sarandian horseman. Without any doubts, the Saradian horseman let go of the wooden spear and pulled out the wooden sword at his waist. The Sarandian horseman used the hilt of the sword to strike his lower abdomen once again. But this time, the Sarandian horseman did not show any mercy. It was just like a close combat battle. Steady, accurate, and ruthless. Bang! A faint sound appeared. The hilt of the sword heavily struck the unprotected abdomen of the vassal knight. The aggressive vassal knight suddenly stopped. His eyes widened, and his gaze was dull. He could not help but let out a muffled groan, curled up his body, and slowly fell to the ground. Only then the Sarandian horseman slowly stepped back. There was still complete silence. Even the servant, who was announcing the result, could not react in time with his trembling lips. No one had expected the result to be so straightforward. Even the people on the viewing platform were completely silent, they felt that their necks were a little stiff. At this moment, they did not even dare to turn their necks to look at Baron Dillon, let alone shout. Such a straightforward failure twice in a row was undoubtedly a provocation to the Baron behind them. Baron Dillon's face was indeed a little ashen. This was very embarrassing. However, he took a breath and tried his best to recover his emotions. He forced a smile and said to Kant, who was beside him, "What a good guard. Little Kant, I'm really puzzled. How can your guard be so strong?" "I don't understand." Kant looked puzzled. He really did not know, and he never saw that coming. He didn't expect these level 4 troop class Sarandian horsemen could defeat the vassal knights so easily. However, he still explained, "That is the strongest among my guards. He used to be able to fight against more than a dozen of Jack Allen's alone. He is a very strong guard." No wonder then, Baron Dillon's expression became much better. The surrounding merchants and landlords also nodded thoughtfully. No wonder then. If he was not the strongest, he would not able to defeat that vassal knight who was equally strong so easily. Otherwise, wouldn't the knights at the Stone Pass become a joke? "Reward the victor with 5 great silver coins," Baron Dillon ordered. At the same time, he smiled and said to his butler, "Give that defeated knight 1 great silver coin and tell him not to lose heart. This is a strong fighter among the guards. Since he started to underestimate the enemy, it is only right for him to lose." "Yes, sir," the butler immediately walked down from the viewing platform. "Fair Baron Dillon." The merchants and landlords all flattered their baron one after another. Even the people below cheered again and continued to liven up the atmosphere. Obviously, they had also accepted this reason. After all, Baron Dillon was the supreme authority of the territory. The explanation he gave was completely correct, there was no need to doubt it. The reward was soon given. However, Kant shook his head at Manad, who was beside him. The two of them came to an understanding. Manad immediately understood. He quickly walked down from the viewing platform and went to the outer area of the arena below the city wall. After giving a few gentle reminders to the other waiting Sarandian horsemen, he returned. Seeing Manad nodded, Kant smiled. It was good that it was done. "The competition will continue," the butler's voice sounded again. The Sarandian horsemen and the vassal knights were engaged in a fierce battle. However, it was no longer as straightforward and sudden as the previous match. On the contrary, the following Sarandian horseman appeared to be a little clumsy. Their fight techniques were very methodical in their attacks, it was almost as standard as the textbook. Sometimes, it was not suitable for a real battle, even for a simulating battle. Very soon, these Sarandian horsemen and the vassal knights had some wins and some losses between them. But in the end, more horsemen lost. It brightened the faces of the vassal knights. They secretly discussed with each other as well. They secretly ridiculed these knight attendants who looked dull at first glance. The attack is too rigid, a smile returned to Baron Dillon's face. Yes, Kant nodded. In the arena, the last match ended. The Sarandian horseman used the most standard attack method and was easily dodged by the agile vassal knight. Then, the vassal knight used the wooden sword to point at the back of the Sarandian horseman, announcing the victory of this match. Long live! You are the strongest. The knight under Baron Dillon is the strongest knight. The crowds were shouting and cheering for their vassal knights to win the tournament. The atmosphere in the entire arena was extremely heated. It was the same on the viewing platform. Everyone was praising the excellent combat skills of the vassal knights. At the same time, they were secretly belittling the Sarandian horsemen's rigid and textbook-like attack method. Their words were filled with disdain. Ha ha! The last victorious vassal knight also let out a victorious battle cry. He raised his wooden shield and wooden sword high and made a provocative action towards the Sarandian horsemen. However, his provocation was still ignored. The 20 Sarandian horsemen turned around and left. However, in the eyes of the crowds and the vassal knights, they were fleeing in panic. There were even more jeers at them. Little Kant, I hope you won't be angry. Baron Dillon turned his head, he seemed to be consoling Kant. Sometimes, victory cannot be limited to those inferior Jack Allen. After all, only our human warriors can possess all kinds of exquisite techniques and powerful strength. Perhaps, Kant shrugged his shoulders in disappointment. However, no one could see the hidden mockery in his lowered eyes. That's right, this was only a tournament. But after fighting in the Sarand Desert, experiencing countless battles, and being bestowed with powerful combat techniques by the system, how could the Sarandian horseman easily lose the victory of the tournament? If he had not asked Manad to inform the Sarandian horsemen, these vassal knights would probably have been beaten to the ground by now, making Baron Dillon lost his face. This was for the sake of the overall situation. Kant wasn't willing to reveal his strength so early. It was good enough to show a little of his strength and let Baron Dillon know that he had the support from a hidden force. If he were to reveal Oasis, look out now. It might ended up that Baron Dillon would be afraid of him, and there was even the possibility of Baron Dillon directly falling out with him. The current harmony was based on the premise that Kant's strength was weaker. Once Baron Dillon discovered that Kant's strength had taken root in the Naran Desert and became a terrifying devouring beast, it would be absolutely impossible for him to sleep as peacefully as he did now. He would probably not hesitate to collude with the other stronger noble forces in the dukedom of Leo and join forces to devour Kant. No one was a fool to be able to become a noble, and no one was willing to see the other nobles become stronger than themselves. Thus, Kant just pursed his lips and smiled. But the others thought that this was the awkwardness and embarrassment after losing the match. Baron Dillon even walked over and patted Kant's shoulder, he smiled and said, "You are already lucky to have this group of guards. As long as they have a few more years of practice, they will definitely comparable to my vassal knights. Don't be discouraged, it's not a big deal." "Well, thank you for your arrangement, Uncle Dillon," Kant smiled and nodded. The atmosphere became harmonious. While Baron Dillon was holding a sweet wine mixed with honey and about to say something, the chubby butler quickly walked over from the tower next to the viewing platform. His face was a little flustered. "What's wrong?" Baron Dillon asked with a frown. The butler came to the side of Baron Dillon and said hurriedly, "I don't know what's going on. Viscount Wayne's vassal knight has arrived outside, and he even said that he wants to participate in the tournament." Viscount Wayne's vassal knight, Baron Dillon frowned. His expression was bitter. He reprimanded the butler, I don't remember inviting that old thing, Viscount Wayne's vassal knight, to participate. What's going on? I was the one who volunteered to participate. As he spoke, a middle-aged man with a cold expression walked out from the tower beside him. The surrounding landlords and merchants were slightly stunned. As for the vassal knights belonging to Baron Dillon, their expressions were solemn as they stared at the middle-aged man. They subconsciously clenched the wine glasses in their hands, their faces cold without any slight of a smile. Knight Terence, it's such a coincidence to see you here at such a time. Baron Dillon was wearing a smile on his face. However, it was a cold and impatient smile. I actually forgot to send you an invitation to the tournament. It really makes me feel a little apologetic. You must have come in a hurry and must not have made any preparations. Why don't I invite you to participate in the next tournament in advance? Oh, thank you, Baron Dillon. I wonder when you will hold the next tournament, the middle-aged knight called Terence also asked with a smile. Baron Dillon shrugged. About 10 years later. Ha ha ha. Immediately, the surrounding vassal knights burst into laughter. These knights who belonged to Baron Dillon, of course, were not on good terms with the vassal knights who were under the command of Viscount Wayne. This stemmed from the conflict between the two noble families. However, Dillon was a baron, and was lower than Wayne, the Viscount who ruled the dukedom's northern county. They had always been bullied. Now, they could find an opportunity to ridicule the vassal knights of the Viscount, which was also a pleasant thing for them. Although they did not dare to directly ridicule him, they still laughed when they matched with Baron Dillon's words. It could also bring them psychological comfort. Well, that's a pity. However, Terence was not angry at all. Instead, he said faintly, 10 years is a long time. It's long enough for some noble to be stripped of their noble title and become a lowly commoner again. After a pause, he looked at Baron Dillon. He said calmly, oh, maybe it's even worse than a commoner, just like those dirty and smelly poor people. Chapter 176, Expected Defeat. The subordinates of my subordinates are not my subordinates. The vassals of my vassals are not my vassals. This is a truth that has been passed down from the dukedom of Leo, and even from the entire human kingdoms. Just like the current Terence. He was Viscount Wayne's vassal knight. As long as he did not make any obvious humiliation to Baron Dillon, or directly speak rudely, then he could still point at the mulberry tree while cursing the locust tree, without any troubles. Even if something happened to him, Viscount Wayne would be his backing. Baron Dillon also understood this logic. He squinted his eyes slightly and snorted coldly. Knight Terence, I remember that your fief should be 2 days' journey from the east of the Stone Pass. You must have worked hard to participate in the tournament that I organized. It's not hard, Knight Terence smiled. I came here to take the first place. I also want to prove to Viscount Wayne that I, as a knight, am the strongest. At the same time, he looked at the vassal knights around him who did not look friendly. He smiled and said, of course, it's not very strong. It's just a little bit stronger. This sentence was merciless. It directly pointed out that no knight could compare to him at the Stone Pass. Baron Dillon's face was ashen. He gritted his teeth and his breathing became rapid. The faces of the merchants and landlords on the viewing platform did not look good. However, they did not dare to say anything. After all, the knights could still get involved in these noble mess, but none of these so-called celebrities could interfere at all. However, Baron Dillon's vassal knights were furious. Arrogant bastard! This is not your Viscount Wayne's Logue Castle. If you have something on your sleeve, go down and try. These vassal knights let out angry roars and directly pointed at Terence with their eyes wide open. They did not welcome this knight Terence, who was in fact spying on them despite he came from the Logue Castle near to the Stone Pass. If Terence agreed, these guys would definitely let him know what was the taste of being ganged up. Sometimes nobles could be unreasonable, there were no rules in their eyes. Kant stood behind them. Manad was with him and did not get involved in the fight between the nobles. He just watched quietly, feeling a little bored. It was just a dog-eat-dog fight. But at this moment, the dialogue box in front of his eyes flashed. Ding, side quest issued. Side quest, contact with extraordinary power. Reward, body of a knight. Introduction, when you came to this world, you found that there was some mysterious and powerful extraordinary power hidden. Now that you can contact it, ask your soldiers to help you. Maybe you can contact this power. It was a temporary side quest that had not been seen for a long time. Kant was slightly stunned. Right in front of him, Knight Terence nodded with a smile as if he was responding to the challenges of the vassal knights. He said directly, "All right, then I will go to the arena and wait for everyone." After saying this, Knight Terence looked at Baron Dillon. "This is really a kind invitation." "Hee hee." Baron Dillon sneered in a low voice and said calmly, "As long as you have the ability, even beggars can participate in the competition." "Of course, Knight Terence, you can also participate. Let's wait and see." Knight Terence smiled and walked to the edge of the viewing platform. The merchants and landlords walked away one after another. Terence stood by the city wall and looked at the civilians below. The stunned civilians were looking back at him. He turned to the vassal knights and said, "Then who will go first? I don't have much time. I hope that all of you can go to the arena as soon as possible so that I can quickly win the champion of this tournament." "You," the vassal knights went mad and didn't finish their words. Terence stood at the side of the city wall, then he directly jumped down. It was like he had committed suicide. "Oh!" the merchants and landlords cried out in surprise. The civilians below also cried out in shock. With a muffled bang, Terence's voice came from below. "Let's begin quickly." The vassal knights widened their eyes as if they had seen a ghost. Even the big merchants and landlords were trembled and turned their heads to look at Baron Dillon. As the upper-class celebrities at the Stone Pass, since they could stand on the viewing platform, it meant that their status was not low. They also understood certain things. For example, there were strict rankings among the knight class. Grand Knight, Baron Dillon's face was livid. Even if he did not go to the edge of the city wall and take a look, he knew that this height of 7 meters would not pose any threat to Terence. Terence had already mastered a little extraordinary power and had rapidly improved his physical fitness. At this moment, Kant took a step forward. With a sincere expression on his face, he asked, "Uncle Dillon, this Terence does not seem to have a very harmonious relationship with you? Now that he has appeared, he really does not have the slightest courtesy." "Humph," Baron Dillon snorted coldly. "This is the vassal knight of that old thing, Viscount Wayne." As he spoke, he frowned and said softly, "I did not expect that this fellow would actually become a Grand Knight. Viscount Wayne must have gotten someone to bestow him with extraordinary power. He must have really invested a lot of capital. Uncle Dillon, why don't we do this?" Kant seemed to know nothing. He patted his chest and said, "Let my strongest guard go up and test that guy. If there is any problem, let your knight go up. After all, this guy has offended Uncle Dillon. In my opinion, we should let him know what etiquette is." Kant's suggestion made Baron Dillon squint his eyes slightly. He nodded and said with a smile, "Then that's it." It was exactly what he wanted to do, to let this Kant's man go up and test Terence. There was a sarcasm in his heart, but he nodded solemnly. "I've really troubled you, little Kant. Your help really touched me." "It's no trouble at all," Kant laughed happily. "Uncle Dillon is so good to me. How could I be in trouble?" As he said that, he turned to Manad and said, "Let that guy go up and teach this Terence a lesson." "Understood," Manad nodded respectfully and then retreated. Soon, the Sarandian horseman walked out from the arena below. Terence was also wearing a training uniform. He did not use the wooden shields and swords in his hands. When he saw the Sarandian horseman walk out, he had a mocking smile on his face. I haven't seen you before. You're the new vassal knight of Baron Dillon. Lord Kant's guard, the Sarandian horseman replied coldly. Terence raised his eyebrows slightly and looked up at the viewing platform. Kant's young face was imprinted in his eyes. He nodded thoughtfully. Oh, Baron Kant's guard. I didn't expect that Princess left so many things behind. I didn't expect that even if he was exiled to the Naran desert, there were people still willing to follow him. Let's begin. Sarandian horseman did not say a single word. All right, Terence nodded. And just as the servant waved the flag, the battle began. Sarandian horseman was already so cautious that he did not choose to attack first. Ridiculous, Terence shook his head contemptuously and quickly walked forward. He raised the wooden shield in his hand and slightly raised the wooden sword. He looked quite capable, no less than Sir Hobson, who had brought 50 retainer knights to help Kant. They were all elites who had experienced actual combat. The Sarandian horseman was unafraid as he held the wooden spear in his hand tightly. This weapon was heavy and made of solid wood. It was no less than the iron spear he used. The two of them approached. Bang! The Sarandian horseman quickly stabbed the wooden spear while Terence raised the wooden shield. Just like how he had used this move to block the vassal knight's stab, Terence slightly turned his body and let the wooden spear slide away. Terence moved forward and said with a smile, "Your skills are not bad." Humph! The Sarandian horseman snorted coldly. He did not panic. Instead, he was unusually calm. He let go of the wooden spear and pulled out the wooden sword in his hand. However, this time, he did not use the hilt of the sword. Instead, he swung the sword from the bottom up, just in front of Terence. "You can do it," Baron Dillon praised from the top of the city wall. With this decisive move and this reaction speed, he could indeed be called an elite knight. So strong, even the vassal knights were secretly amazed. Now it seemed that there were not many people in their group who could match up to this strongest guard. The uppercut? Well, this combat technique is very standard, Terence also nodded. He stretched out his hand and used his shield to block the attack from the bottom to the top. He said a professional attack name and took 2 steps back at the same time. Your basic skills are very solid and you're determined. You should have been on the battlefield and killed many people, right? Oh, the surrounding civilians heard it clearly and immediately cried out in surprise. Sarandian horseman was still indifferent. Continue. But even so, you can't beat me, Terence chuckled. A red light appeared in his eyes as he bowed slightly. He said softly, "Didn't your knight mentor tell you that no matter how strong a knight's skills are, they can't beat a grand knight who has mastered extraordinary powers?" Huff huff huff! Faint flames instantly burst out around him. Terence's figure moved forward at high speed. His speed was more than twice as fast as before. His increasing speed did not give the Sarandian horseman much time to react. He could only take a deep breath and subconsciously place the wooden sword in front of his chest. Terence had already raised his shield and appeared in front of him. A faint heat wave swept over. "Go down!" Terence's voice appeared in front of the Sarandian horseman. The Sarandian horseman widened his eyes. He did not see how this grand knight got close to him, but he saw that the shield crashed heavily into the wooden sword in front of his chest. With a crisp crack, the Sarandian horseman's chest slightly caved in, his entire body seemed to have been pushed out by a great force. He flew for 3 to 4 meters and fell to the ground. It took him a long time to get up, and he coughed out a few mouthfuls of blood. It was obvious that his inner abdomen had suffered a great impact. The civilians below were completely silent, just like what had happened just now. It was the same on the viewing platform. "Thank you." After coughing, Sarandian horseman supported himself and stood up. He nodded at Terence and said, "I lost." After saying that, he did not wait any longer. He threw away the broken wooden sword and walked towards the city wall. He knew that Terence had shown mercy. Chapter 177, Knight's Body of Kant. This was a tournament. It was not a life and death battle on the battlefield. Terence had indeed shown mercy. The Sarandian horseman thanked him for this. "You're a good fellow. If you think it's all right, Viscount Wayneslogue Castle welcomes you to join." Terence put away his shield and looked at the Sarandian horseman from where he stood. He smiled and asked, "How about it? Think about it." "I'm not interested." Sarandian horseman shook his head, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and returned to his companions. They were loyal to Kant. They had no intentions of the recruiting by any local powers. On the viewing platform, as expected, Baron Dillon narrowed his eyes slightly. His expression was rather pale, but he had also noticed Terence's weakness. He turned around and spoke to his two most trusted vassal knights. "He just became a Grand Knight not too long ago. It seems that he wants to come here and establish his authority. I think that he seems to have misunderstood something. He thinks that there are no Grand Knights at our Stone Pass. He will regret it." The vassal knight on the left nodded and stepped forward. "Very good," Baron Dillon nodded with a smile. His expression calmed down. The vassal knight moved forward to the direction of the city wall and stepped into the air. Like a zippy cheetah, he stepped on the stone wall and landed in the middle of the arena. "This is that lord." He also jumped down. "Edmund the god of war, what kind of power is this? This is the legendary Grand Knight." The civilians around the arena were still watching and cried out in surprise. Even the other landlords and merchants on the viewing platform on the city wall widened their eyes in surprise. However, those vassal knights looked calm and expected. Although these two vassal knights did not display the power of Grand Knights, these two were capable to deal with the crisis in the Stone Pass and stabilize the situation very quickly. If it was not for the legendary Grand Knight, it would definitely be impossible to do that. In the arena, this vassal knight held a wooden shield and a wooden sword. His eyes flickered with a faint blue light. He smiled and said, "Knight Terence, I did not expect that you would also become a Grand Knight. This is really something worth congratulating." "Yes, I have only become a Grand Knight for less than half a year." Terence nodded, but his eyes were a little more solemn. "The Stone Pass has a strong foundation. Could it be that you guys have colluded with those rebels?" He paused and looked up at Kant, who was standing beside Baron Dillon on the city wall, and he looked a bit disdain. "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Baron Dillon was originally from the rebellion. How could he collude with them? He's just returned to where he's from." "Shut up!" Blue light flashed in the vassal knight's eyes. He said angrily, "If you continue to speak rudely, I will officially propose a life and death duel to you as a noble to defend the honor of Baron Dillon." "What a good dog," Terence mocked, but he did not continue. He had already said so. There was nothing more to say. Both of them were a little angry during this tournament. "Draw the swords and begin." The reddish heat wave was like fire, colliding with the light blue waves like water. Both of them carried extraordinary power and an oppressive aura. Even the surroundings of the arena formed a current of hot and cold air. This caused the surrounding civilians to retreat. Even the lance footmen, who were maintaining the order, were also a little messy. The eyes of the celebrities on the viewing platform, as well as the children they brought along, including the vassal knights, were filled with fanaticism. This was the magnificent extraordinary power that they were pursuing. This included Kant. His eyes widened slightly as he looked at the figures of the two knights crossing each other. Their speed, agility, and explosive strength had not only doubled, it was almost 3 times stronger than the Sarandian horsemen. It was just like the movements of the best athletes who only wore thin clothes. There was also the heat wave and cold current released from their surrounding. Extraordinary power was surging out along with their fight. Could it be? Kant looked at the red and blue extraordinary strength, and combined it with some novels and movies that he had read in his previous life. He seemed to have thought of something. However, a dialog box suddenly popped up on his retina. Ding! After your unremitting efforts, the mission has been completed. Side mission, Contact with extraordinary power completed. Reward, body of a knight. Introduction, extraordinary power is unique and mystery in this world. You have already come into contact with its essence. As a result, your physique has changed. Perhaps your physique now was comparable to a Swadian knight. The dialogue box popped up, but it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Although Kant knew that it would not be discovered by others, he still remained cautious. Just as the dialogue box disappeared on his retina, the mission reward that he had obtained, the golden card with the faint figure on it, suddenly shattered, turning into a data stream that instantly entered his mind. Immediately after, a heat wave formed in his body, causing him to swallow a mouthful of saliva. His face was flushed red due to the heat in his body. Huff huff huff, Kant's breathing was extremely rapid. Fortunately, everyone's attention was attracted by the tournament in the arena. No one cared about this ridiculous puppet-like Baron. Even Baron Dillon, who was beside him, took a few quick steps forward. His eyes were solemn as he watched the tournament that concerned his dignity and stared at the movements of the two Grand Knights. Even when he heard Kant's rapid breathing, he was treated it as a normal reaction of shock when Kant saw the Grand Knights. Instead, he felt even more disdain in his heart. However, Kant's body became hotter and hotter. A large amount of cold sweat appeared on his forehead and back. It was like his entire body was drenched. In the end, the heat spread to his entire body. Only then did Kant finally calm down. His breathing gradually became calm. However, the redness on his face and the cold sweat on his body made him look extremely disgraceful as he stared blankly into the space. He looked like a pitiful child who had been shocked. He was indeed only 16 years old. It was natural for him to have such a reaction when he saw a Grand Knight who possessed extraordinary strength competing. Even the descendants of the noble families on the viewing platform, who followed behind celebrities and were about the same age as him, had the same reaction. Their faces were flushed with red and sweat as they stared straight at the actions of the two extraordinary Grand Knights below, and their breathing quickened. However, Kant knew that he had become different under the heat that spread throughout his body. He slowly clenched his fist. Under the body of a weak young man, there was an endless amount of power. Kant even felt that his current strength could destroy an ox with a single punch. Of course, this was a joke. However, the power that was contained within his body, and the various longsword, knight's sword, footman's sword, bastard sword, all lance, military lance, and spear that were all instilled in his brain. There was also kite shield, fan-shaped shield, round shield, square shield, and even all sorts of warhorse techniques. It like if he was born with all these knowledges, or had gone through 16 years of arduous training. Knight's body. Kant understood in his heart that this was the reward from the system's temporary side quest. And in the arena below the viewing platform, this match came to an end with Knight Terence retreating, as well as the wooden sword in his hand that was wrapped in ice. I lost, Knight Terence was unwilling, but he still admitted defeat. Ha, the vassal knight revealed a smile, he looked at him and said faintly, we will continue to hold a banquet tonight. If you are interested, why don't you continue to participate and we can talk about this match together? You have just advanced to be a Grand Knight, this is probably your first time participating in a tournament, right? There's no need for that, Terence's face returned to a smile. He casually threw away the wooden sword that was wrapped in a faint layer of ice and fell onto the stone platform. With a crisp sound, the wooden sword instantly shattered into pieces, just like the sawdust that was wrapped in ice. He raised his head to look at Kant and directly turned around to walk outside. Below the tournament stage, there were already attendants who brought warhorse over. The two of them quickly hopped onto their horses. At the same time, Terence shouted to Baron Dillon on the viewing platform, "Respected Baron Dillon, Viscount Wayne has entrusted me to greet you. He also wishes to cooperate with your trade caravan. If possible, he hopes that you will visit him at Logue Castle another day. He will be very happy." On the viewing platform on the city wall, Baron Dillon's expression was calm. One could not tell whether he was happy, angry, or sad. I understand, Baron Dillon nodded. Let's go. Terence turned his head, pulled the reins, and rode away. His knight attendant followed behind him and soon left the stone pass. He rode away quickly. Hearing the faint cheers coming from behind, Terence loosened his grip on the reins. A cold current spread from his hand, it actually caused his palms to the rein as if his palms were frozen. However, Terence did not care at all. With a slight heat wave in his hand, he forcefully pulled off his palm on the reins. Fresh blood immediately flowed out along with the broken skin. The attendant beside him was surprised and quickly took out a pure white linen cloth to bandage him up. Having not seen the damage caused by extraordinary power before, he looked a little terrified. This is a minor injury. Terence chuckled, his expression calm. He turned his head to look in the direction of the stone pass, but his expression was solemn as he said, "We need to return quickly." Viscount Wayne must be very curious as to know why Baron Dillon's power has erupted so quickly in just a short month. The two of them quickly rode their horses and disappeared on the rugged dirt road. Meanwhile, at the stone pass, the tournament in the arena ended, and the entire competition ended as the sun gradually set in the west. Many civilians left while chatting and laughing. Today's tournament was a feast for their eyes. Meanwhile, those celebrities and gentries brought their most outstanding family members and rearranged the banquet in the Lord's Hall at dusk. They began to show unusual enthusiasm to those vassal knights, especially that Grand Knight. They even expressed their goodwill in a humble and respectful tone. Kant and the others were still the same. The Sarandian horsemen just lost the match. There were not many celebrities, merchants and landlords came over to greet them. Obviously, for them Kant's guards were not qualified enough to let their outstanding sons and daughters join them. However, it allowed Kant to avoid nagging. Chapter 178, The Development of Baron Dillon. The champion of this tournament was obviously the vassal knight. The chubby butler personally brought a silver plate. With the light blue linen cloth at the bottom, there was a large silver coin as big as an egg on it. The edges were decorated with exquisite patterns, and in the middle was the head of the Archduke of Leo, Cameron. This represented the legal tender recognized by the Castle of Leo. It was a recently minted silver coin as well. The gentries who attended the banquet subconsciously swallowed their saliva. Just for the value of these 100 great silver coins, it was more than enough to buy over 100 acres of land in the village near the Stone Pass. However, no one was so stupid. The land in the northern county was very poor. If they bought more than 100 acres of land in here, it was estimated that they would not be able to earn back the 100 great silver coins even after 10 years of production. The vassal knight took the silver plate respectfully and sincerely thanked Baron Dillon. At the same time, he left under the applause and handed it to his most trusted servant to put it back in his room for storage. After everything was arranged properly, he returned to the banquet. The atmosphere of the banquet was very harmonious. Kant was still holding his wine glass and chatting with Baron Dillon. The topic was also the tournament in the afternoon. "Little Kant, I see that you are drenched in cold sweat. This is not a good sign. Although your noble etiquette is impeccable, your courage should also be improved." Baron Dillon instructed him as an elder. Kant lifted his wine glass in embarrassment and took a sip. "I will." "Ha ha ha," seeing Kant's expression, Baron Dillon shook his head and laughed. He hid the scorn in his eyes and looked at the guests in front of him. He raised his wine glass and shouted to everyone, "For the arrival of little Kant, we congratulate him with a toast. We congratulate Baron Kant on his arrival." In the entire Lord's Hall, the gentries, celebrities, and the vassal knights all raised their wine glasses. The sweet scent of drunkenness had already begun to spread. Although they were raising their glasses for Kant, all of them were looking at Baron Dillon. To them, the actual controller of the Stone Pass was the person they should respect. As for that Baron Kant? Oh, don't joke around. He was just a pitiful person who had been exiled to the Naran desert. Everyone in the dukedom of Leo knew that Cameron did not like this son of his. Even all the noble families did not like him. Otherwise, they would not have banished Kant and given the barren land of the Naran desert to him. The northern county was already sorrow and barren, and the Stone Pass was the most barren and desolate area in the northern county. But compared to the Naran desert, that was the true wilderness, the forbidden area of civilization, a terrifying area in all the harsh environments that one could describe. An area that even escaped slaves were unwilling to set foot in. They would rather be caught and killed instead of entering the Naran desert. Because living in the Naran desert was comparable to the greatest torture in prison. Once, the dukedom of Leo issued a law in the chaotic political situation 100 years ago. The prisoner who had committed treason and the crime of regicide was given a dull knife, a water sack, and a piece of bread. Then, they led a team to the Naran desert, to throw this criminal into the depths of the desert. This law was effective and intimidating during the chaotic political situation at that time, and it had continued until now. It was enough to show the terror of Naran desert. The dinner ended late at night. The drunken gentries and celebrities still maintained good manners and thanked Baron Dillon. Then, the dinner was dismissed. With the help of their respective servants, they returned to their own homes in a carriage. Many people's homes were close to the official residence at the Stone Pass. There were also many people who came from many villages outside the Stone Pass. Even the vassal knights left in the end. They had drunk quite a lot tonight, they were also drunk and satisfied. After all, for these people, the tournament and the sumptuous banquet were extremely exciting. "Uncle Dillon, I'll go to bed now." Kant's face was full of excitement, and he said gratefully, "This is really a beautiful day." "As long as you're happy, little Kant," Baron Dillon laughed and patted his shoulder. His slightly red face had a bright and forthright smile. "I won't forget the help you've given me. We're the best of friends, and we're also the best of family. No one can break us." "Yes, no one," Kant nodded firmly. Only then the two of them separated. Kant returned to his room. After drinking a lot of wine, he quickly fell asleep. Manit and the 10 Sarandian horsemen who followed him also fell asleep in their respective rooms. The entire mansion returned to silence. However, Baron Dillon appeared in his living room. The two vassal knights were also there. The drunken look on their faces caused by the wine had disappeared. Even the redness on their faces had disappeared. They looked like they had not touched a single drop of alcohol. However, the three of them did not care about this small matter. "How is it?" Baron Dillon turned his head to look at the vassal knight and said with a depressed expression, "that Terence actually became a grand knight. Did you feel anything?" "He just became a grand knight not long ago," the vassal knight said. "Of course," Baron Dillon snorted. "It seems that it has not even been half a year." He narrowed his eyes slightly, his expression was very awful. "Half a year ago, this guy was still polite to me. Now that he has become a grand knight, he dares to be rude to me. If it wasn't for that old bastard, Viscount Wayne, I definitely wouldn't believe it. It's also very coincidental that he appeared at the tournament," another vassal knight said. "They have a spy." "Let the rats handle it," Baron Dillon waved his hand. "They know what to do. I don't want to let these rats eat and drink for free. They are useless. Now there's a spy, find them all." "Understood," the vassal knight nodded. He was in charge of leading the spy group, the rats. "We need to speed up our plan." Baron Dillon opened his mouth and asked the two vassal knights, "I asked you to arrange for people to go to the territory of Southern County to find some mercenaries. Any news?" "Yes," the vassal knight nodded. "How is it?" Baron Dillon asked. "There are 500 elite mercenaries who are willing to accept our recruitment. The price is 30 great silver coins per month. If we start a war with the enemy, we will need an additional 20 great silver coins per month during the war as well as a monthly silver coin reward," the vassal knight replied. 500 people, Baron Dillon automatically omitted the so-called elite ranking and nodded. 30 great silver coins per month. I accept this. There are still 500 pirates who are willing to join us. We only need 10 great silver coins per month. The vassal knight shrugged. I think it's useless to have them. We don't have a river here. I think that these people were captured by the river patrol team of Lionheart City. They just want to hide from the storm. When the storm passes, they will definitely return to the river of Resnistikan and won't listen to our orders at all. Then tell them to get lost, Baron Dylan snorted coldly. Yes, the vassal knight nodded. However, Baron Dylan frowned and asked in a serious tone, are there no other mercenaries willing to accept our long-term employment? This is not in line with those greedy people that grasping of money. You know, the vassal knight smiled bitterly. Those famous mercenary groups in the dukedom of Leo are in fact the forces of various noble families. If we really hire them, Stone Pass might be targeted by some noble families in the future. After all, our current table salt trade has already attracted the attention of Viscount Wayne of Northern County. That old dog. When Baron Dylan thought of that old thing, anger rose in his heart. He slammed the table heavily and stood up with his hands behind his back. He paced back and forth in the conference room as if he had thought of something. He turned his head and said to the vassal knight who was in charge of this matter, "Oh right, can we find the mercenary group from that crazy Countess Elsia in East County?" "No," the vassal knight answered helplessly. "Why?" Baron Dylan frowned. "The territory of Countess at East County is still locked down, especially the recent conflict with the Silver Platter Kingdom on the other side of the river. It is said that they even clashed with each other on the river and almost started a war with the Lord of Nazir Castle on the other side. Our forces are unable to infiltrate." The vassal knight shook his head. "Humph, it's still the same battle from 10 years ago," Baron Dylan snorted coldly. He was used to it. If it wasn't for Archduke Cameron ceding Countess's Nazir Castle to the Silver Platter Kingdom, their blood-related relationship wouldn't be so stiff. This wasn't a secret. He had obtained his title during the war between the Dukedom of Leo and the Silver Platter Kingdom. Now, it had nothing to do with him. Baron Dylan frowned and ordered, "These are all minor things. Go to other places and contact them. As long as they can introduce qualified mercenaries to us, I can give them commission. The higher the quality of the introduced mercenary and the more there are, the higher the commission will be. It will be settled in great silver coins, and there will be no limit." "Understood," the vassal knight nodded. Another vassal knight asked, "Lord, what about Baron Kant?" "Don't act rashly," Baron Dylan said. His face was slightly solemn. He slowly said, "Princess Sophia's forces are still lurking, and they have only just revealed themselves. 16 years is not enough to completely wipe out them. 10 years ago, the Silver Platter Kingdom won the battle, and it is probably the result of the spies left behind by Princess Sophia. Now Kant is still developing rapidly, and it is probably supported by them. We only need to wait slowly and then contact them." "But they have already given up on us," the vassal knight hesitated. "Give up? Ha!" Baron Dylan sneered. "No, we are now the lord close to Kant. We control the Stone Pass, the only passage between the Dukedom of Leo and the Naran Desert. How can they give up? They will come back for us." There was a dangerous look in his eyes. "I will make a fortune this time." Chapter 179, The Route to the Village. The next morning, Kant woke up on his own and opened his eyes. He was extremely energetic. He had drunk quite a lot of alcohol yesterday. Although the alcohol content was low, it was still similar to beer. With his 16-year-old body, he could not withstand too much alcohol. However, he was now refreshed and did not seem to be any different. This was because the system had modified his body and infused it with the body of a Swadian knight. He had peed a few times last night. Basically, he had expelled all the alcohol in his body. After putting on his clothes, Kant felt as if his entire body was filled with endless strength. He shook his neck, and the faint caw-caw sounds kept ringing in his ears. This morning activities brought him comfort. Dang dang dang! The door was lightly knocked. At the same time, Manat said, "Lord Kant, according to the plan, we should set off." "Got it," Kant nodded. "Good morning, Lord Kant." He looked around the room and did not leave anything behind. Then, he opened the door. Outside, Manat and the 10 Sarandian horsemen were waiting. When they saw Kant come out, they hurriedly lowered their heads to greet him. "Okay," Kant nodded. He walked quickly in front. At the same time, he asked Manat, "Have you told Uncle Dylan about us leaving? I don't want Uncle Dylan to wake up in the morning and find out that we left without saying goodbye. This is a very rude thing. It will make things very difficult for me." "Everything has been arranged," Manat replied. "Baron Dylan should be waiting for us at the entrance of the official residence." Kant said, "It's good that Uncle Dylan knows." Early in the morning, the servants in the official residence had also woken up. They were cleaning up the already clean and tidy passageway and the handicrafts placed on both sides. It had to be said. Baron Dylan had recently made a huge fortune. The handicrafts in the official residence had been replaced with brand new ones. In Kant's opinion, there were also quite a number of the most famous silver handicrafts in the Silver Platter Kingdom. Although they were just imitations, all kinds of exquisite animals and plants that were made of silver were placed on the exhibition platform. They still represented wealth. This was not common in the originally poor Stone Pass. Kant came to the entrance of the mansion after greeting him respectfully. As soon as he walked out of the mansion, he saw Baron Dylan standing outside with more than 10 vassal knights behind him. Baron Dylan put a smile on his face. He also came over and gave him a hug. "Little Kant, you've only arrived at Uncle Dylan's for such a short period of time, and you're already leaving the Stone Pass. It really makes me feel a little reluctant for your leave. There were still complicated matters in my territory. I don't want to leave so early either." Kant also hugged Baron Dylan. His face was filled with shame as he sighed softly. "I really don't want to go back." When Baron Dylan heard this, the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. However, he still reminded Kant in a seemingly friendly manner, "That is your territory. If you go out frequently and the nobles of South County find out about it, they will strip you of your right to be a lord. They are very cruel." "They?" Kant snorted and said somewhat unwillingly, "Even if I am not the lord of the Naran Desert, who would go to that desert to be a lord? Those damned fellows would never abandon the rich South County and go to the desert to eat sand." The smile on Baron Dylan's face grew even wider. However, he still turned his head and pointed at the pile of things behind him. "Little Kant, I know that your estate is dangerous, so I've prepared a gift for you. I hope that you will like it." "Thank you so much, Uncle Dylan," Kant was grateful. 50 iron swords, 150 spears, 200 sets of leather armor, 10 bows, and 1,000 arrows, Baron Dylan smiled. "Although it's not much, it can be used by many people." "Thank you very much," Kant nodded gratefully. "Uncle Dylan, these can already arm 200 soldiers. This is really important to me now." Pausing for a moment, Kant continued to ask with a difficult expression, "Uncle Dylan, can you provide more arrows? I also lack such things now. Those jack-allans are like wild beasts. If we don't have bows and arrows to shoot, they will charge straight at me. People don't have much time to react. After all, there aren't many soldiers protecting my estate. It all depends on the archers." "Oh, arrows," Baron Dylan looked troubled. "Back then, Manat also mentioned it to me." "Uncle Dylan, I can pay," Kant sighed. "Other than you, I don't know who else can buy these arrows, especially now that we are leaving the estate. If the remaining soldiers don't have the help of the archers, they can only fight those jack-allans. There will be casualties every day. I can only rely on you. There aren't many arrows in my estate either." Baron Dylan seemed to have made up his mind. He said to Kant, "I'll arrange a trade caravan to purchase a batch of arrows from other lords. When the time comes, I'll sell them to you at the original price. That way, you can protect your own estate." "Then I'm really grateful," Kant bowed his head in gratitude. "We are very close after all," Baron Dillon repeated this sentence. The two of them continued to laugh. Kant was sincere, while Baron Dillon was somewhat pleased with himself, as well as the mockery and disdain in his eyes. For him, it was really easy to purchase arrows. But why did he want to buy too many arrows for Kant? Only when Kant's power was consumed in the Naran desert, he would then able to show up as a more useful savior and secretly come out with more plans. The two of them exchanged a few words and then said goodbye to each other. Baron Dillon sent Kant to the city gate. It was not until Kant's 40 Sarandian horsemen escorted the 30 camels that were full of food and disappeared into the slightly rugged canyon. After that, Baron Dillon finally returned to the official residence. His face was full of mockery and satisfaction while listening to the butler's report of the thousands of great silver coins he had obtained this time. He laughed happily. In his opinion, he had undoubtedly made a fortune. And that was indeed the case. Kant left the gap in the Sinway range and returned to the vast desert. He continued to move forward along the road he had come from. However, after walking for 2 to 3 hours, he directly changed the team and walked towards the east. Looking at the towering Sinway range not far away, Kant sneered. "Look at my Uncle Dillon. Do you think that this will make me feel grateful enough to join him?" Kant shook his head and smiled. The mockery in his eyes became more and more intense. "He is indeed a martial arts noble. Even in the southern county, those cunning 100-year-old noble would not use this little trick because it is simply too deliberate. If it was not for my perfect performance, my Oscars-level acting skill to perform this act, I would have been exposed long ago." Manit on the horse behind him and shrugged slightly. He did not know what Oscars was. However, he knew what Kant meant and could not help but laugh. "But he helped kept us out of sight, especially that so-called Knight Terence, who was sent by Viscount Wayne to probe." "It's not us who are worried," Kant chuckled. "It's my Uncle Dillon." As the trade in table salt increased, the huge profits were swallowed by Baron Dillon, and he became fatter and fatter. Those greedy nobles would definitely not choose to be mercy on him. They would definitely test him. Even all kinds of tricks, schemes, and even force would all appear near the stone pass, causing Baron Dillon, who had taken 3/4 of the profits, to suffer tremendously. But he would never give up on these profits. Especially since he had already tasted the sweetness of these profits, it was even more impossible for him to say that he was giving them away. Those noble families would not be willing to share a small amount of the sweetness. Greed had no end. If one got a little, one would try to get more. Even if Baron Dillon split a small portion of the profits, for others, they just wanted to eat more profits and nibble away at them bit by bit. In the end, Baron Dillon could not take it anymore and would react. Or he could turn against those noble families and use force to decide the outcome of the battle. Or he could choose to be patient with the noble families and instead take Kant's salt mine in his hands. There were only these two choices. However, according to Kant's understanding of Baron Dillon, he would definitely choose the second method. After all, turning against those noble families was equivalent to turning against the entire dukedom of Leo. It was better to take this opportunity to take out Kant and take control of the natural salt mine. Just like what Kant did, he left a small portion of the profits and gave away the rest. Slowly developing, slowly accumulating, and eventually becoming an even more terrifying behemoth. It was just not that simple. Time would not allow him to reach this stage sooner. It would take at least 3 years. Within these 3 years, almost all of Kant's malicious intentions would be blocked by Baron Dillon. Perhaps 3 years later, Baron Dillon be able to withstand the greater pressure and would choose to let go at Kant and against him. But would it really be as simple as Baron Dillon thought? What a joke! By then, Kant would have already grown into an even more terrifying colossus. Come, let's go there. Kant rode in front, leading the camel caravan and the guards forward at the edge of the desert. Looking at the towering scenery range in the east, data streams flashed in his eyes. A route given by the system appeared in his vision. Just like how he had looked for the post house. Now, the system had also given him hints and routes to guide him to the scenery range, to build his new village. It was in the eastern part of the mountain range. According to the estimated distance, it was about half a day's journey. Kant did not have to worry about the issue of supplies. The caravan was already full of food and water sack, which had been replenished at the stone pass in order to find the village. Manad had secretly prepared 3 days' worth of supplies. Obviously, the merchants in the rock pass did not know. They were also not clear about how much supplies they needed to bring from the stone pass to the Oasis lookout. They had never ventured deep into the desert. Walking along the edge of the Naran desert and the scenery range, the undulating mountains became more and more majestic, allowing Kant to visually feel the vastness of the mountain range. The mountains near the desert were rugged, with ridges and cliffs everywhere. And most of them were bare without much green. This was the cause of the desert heat wave, but it was also convenient for Kant and the others to climb. They could find a barely passable mountain path, and they entered the scenery range under Kant's lead. Chapter 180, The First Encounter with Demonized Creature. The scenery range was an undeveloped mountain range. The so-called rugged mountain path was just an adjective. In other words, Kant and the others had followed the undulations of the mountain into the depths of the mountain. They climbed up and down the crooked mountain path, causing the Sarandian horsemen choose to dismount their war horses and continue to lead the war horses deeper into the mountain. As for the camel caravan consisting of 30 camels and the 10 peasants, Kant did not allow them to enter the mountain. Instead, he left Manad and 10 Sarandian horsemen as guards with them. They at the foot of the cliff at the entrance of the mountain, setting up tents to provide support, so they could act as a backup if Kant encountered any unusual situations in the mountain. These one-humped camels were capable of walking in the desert for a long journey. They were undoubtedly at ease and thus established the title of Boat of the Desert and Desert Elf. However, these camels would be cumbersome in the mountain environment compared to the flexible warhorse. This was the main reason that they were left behind. Kant thought that it was better for the camel caravan to stay outside. After all, in the scenery range, demonized creatures, carnivorous beasts, and Jack Allen tribe could be seen almost everywhere. If there were any accidents, it would be troublesome to protect the camel caravan and the accompanying civilians. Kant personally led the team into the scenery range. 30 Sarandian horsemen led their horses and followed him. After the tournament at the Stone Pass, Kant had already understood the level of these level 4 cavalries. They had generally reached the night level of this world. Although they were at the ordinary night level, these Sarandian horsemen had already shown that in terms of combat experience, they were stronger than these ordinary knights. Just like Baron Dillon's vassal knights. If Kant had not noticed that something was wrong and ordered these Sarandian horsemen to use their most basic strength to fight, he expected that these Sarandian horsemen was able to defeat all the vassal knights during the tournament. After all, they were the newly upgraded Sarandian horsemen who had gone through countless trials and tribulations in the Sarandian desert. Even if they lacked extraordinary power and could not contend with grand knights. But according to these Sarandian horsemen, 5 fully armed Mamluks or 20 fully armed Sarandian horsemen would be able to exhaust these grand knights to death. At the very least, they could maintain balance. This made the so-called Grand Knights not dare to recklessly charge forward. The equipment advantage and experience advantage were obvious. These horsemen came from the continent of Karadia, and every level up was a qualitative improvement. Not only would they be instilled with all sorts of combat experience, skills in using weapons, as well as strengthening their physiques, even their willpower would increase. If it really didn't work, there was still a more effective way. Let the level 5 archers all shoot in the same time. A rain of arrows that covered a distance, they would be able to slow down the Grand Knight's movements even if these Grand Knights were slightly injured. After that, their next move would be much simpler. Large formation warfare was the mainstream of the continent of Karadia. Fighting one-on-one like a competitive tournament was not the rule of the battlefield. If one could kill the enemy, they would be the victor, and the victor would receive everything, including praise. This was Kant's confidence in facing a grand knight. Extraordinary power was indeed powerful. But for Kant, who had the system and could recruit a batch of powerful troops at any time, using the large troops to overwhelm the opponent was perhaps a better choice. This was the advantage of large troops and also a guarantee of quality. Furthermore, Kant's troops were not random troops. A level 4 cavalry was a knight. A level 5 cavalry was an elite knight. Although they still could not reach the level of a grand knight, how many grand knights could there be in this world? Could it be that they could form a pure grand knight troop like ordinary cavalry? Kant clearly did not believe it. Such extravagant behavior was something that even Grand Duke Cameron of the Dukedom of Leo could not do. According to Kant's understanding in the books, Grand Knights could only be trained by other Grand Knight instructors. When it came to the seeds of the mysterious power, a Grand Knight instructor could only train 5 Grand Knights in his lifetime. And for every Grand Knight that was trained, they would be in a period of weakness in the following year. The use of extraordinary power would become extremely weak, and they were no different from an ordinary knight. After training 5 Grand Knights, if one wanted to train the 6th, they would have to pay the price with their lives. Usually, there would be no Grand Knight mentor train more than 2 Grand Knights in their younger ages. Usually, when they were in their old age, they would train all 5 Grand Knights. At the last moment of their lives, they would enlighten the last Grand Knight. This was exactly the reason why Grand Knights were so precious. There were detailed records in the rare books in the Academy. They continued to follow the mountain path given by the system into the depths of the Sinway range. The heat wave from the Naran desert had already dissipated quite a bit. Kant and the others could even feel a faint chill emanating from the mountain. It was somewhat cool, as if it almost as cool as the Stone Pass. At the same time, as they went deeper into the Sinway range, the surrounding vegetation had also become richer, no longer as barren as the Naran desert. The entire area had become lush green. If it wasn't for the fact that they were close to the desert, Kant would have thought that this was the royal hunting ground in the north of the castle of Leo, the mountain of Leo where countless lions lived. When he thought of the mountain of Leo, Kant frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, be cautious." "Understood." The 30 Sarandian horsemen behind him replied in unison. In fact, they had also discovered that something was wrong with this mountain forest. Although it had the appearance of a lush forest, it was too quiet. Not to mention that they had not seen the sand gazelle, elk, and other herbivores, even rabbits, mountain rats, and other small animals were nowhere to be seen. If they raised their heads to look at the sky, it would take quite a while for a few unknown birds to fly past. The birds were like they were in a hurry and did not dare to stop and chirp on the branches. Clearly, this was not right. And something was very wrong. Harumph the warhorse that was led by the reins was shaking its nose and shaking its head anxiously. Its huge head was shaking, and it blinked its eyes and refused to move forward. Clearly, there was something to fear in the forest ahead. It had already been noticed by the sensitive warhorse. "Pay attention," Kant's voice was calm. "Understood." The Sarandian horsemen behind them released the reins one after another. They had shields in their left hands and spears in their right hands. After they dispersed, they looked forward with extreme vigilance in their eyes. They were not worried that the warhorse would flee. These warhorses were raised by the Sarandian horsemen since they were young. Even if they died in battle, these horses would still linger around the corpses. To the cavalry, warhorse was not only a riding tool, but also a family member, a friend, and a trusted comrade. They had a long-term connection, and both sides had a tacit understanding. Roar! Just as they were getting ready, an angry roar suddenly erupted from the forest. In the depths of a dense forest, a huge black figure squeezed through the sparse bushes. With a pair of scarlet eyes, it roared and rushed out of the forest. It seemed to be angered from not being able to ambush them, and it directly charged towards Kant and the others. It opened its mouth filled with terrifying fangs. "Prepare for battle," the Sarandian horsemen instantly spread their legs and bowed with their spears in their hands. The 30 of them stood side by side, the tip of their spears aimed at the charging black beast. The war horses behind them seemed to have been frightened, and they all let out a loud snort and a rapid hiss. However, as the horsemen had yet to leave, they jumped around impatiently and did not follow their biological instincts to escape. Roar! However, when the black beast saw the restless warhorse, its eyes became even redder. It let out an angry roar and rushed out of the dense forest at an even faster speed. Obviously, it was already very hungry. It wanted to eat the fat and strong warhorse as its food. Demonized creature. Kant instantly recognized this black beast that looked like a black bear but was covered in black scales. He took out the warhorse's bow that Baron Dylan had given him. He pulled the bowstring and knocked the arrow. The entire bow was pulled into a full moon shape. As he released his fingers, it shot out the arrow instantly. Whoosh! The arrow tore through the air and let out a long shrill cry. The black bear-like demonized creature did not dodge at all. The arrow carried powerful kinetic energy and went straight to its cheek. It splashed a pile of black blood, causing the demonized creature to feel pain and even let out an angry roar. Clearly, this arrow did not cause any fatal damage. Kant pulled out another arrow and knocked it on the bowstring and forcefully shoot it out. Whoosh! The mournful sound of the arrow continued. The black bear-like demonized creature was shot in the chest, but even within a 30-meter radius, only a small part of the arrow shaft pierced into its body. The black bear-like demonized creature howling, it charged even faster, and its eyes became even more red and furious. Both sides were less than 10 meters apart. The 30 Sarandian horsemen bowed and lowered their weight. Their spears were aimed directly at the demonized creature's eyes, head, and chest, which were both vital parts. The spear was made of fine wood and iron-clad steel. It was not so easy to block. In terms of piercing damage, it was even stronger than a feather arrow. Roar! The demonized creature that looked like a black bear crashed towards them. The phalanx of 30 Sarandian horsemen felt like they had encountered a heavy cavalry. A huge impact was transmitted to the spear in their hands along with the demonized creature's charge. They utilized the impact transmitted to the spear and pierced the demonized creature into the eyes, mouth, and chest. Just as the 30 Sarandian horsemen retreated a few steps, and even someone at the front was knocked down, the 30 horsemen and the 30 spears in their hands actually managed to forcefully block the huge demonized creature. Roar! The scales on its chests were pierced through by the spear, its eyes were pierced through by the spear, and even its mouth were pierced through by 2 spears. However, this black bear-like demonized creature was still roaring crazily, flapping its 2 huge palms. Black blood splattered all over its body, and it struggled to resist as if it had just returned from the afterlife. Whoosh! Kant's movement was very fast and he pulled out the knight's sword was pulled out of its scabbard. Just like a standard knight's stab, the slender knight's sword in his hand directly pierced into the hole in its ear that was not protected by the scales, and directly into its brain. As Kant's wrist shook slightly, the black bear-like demonized creature's struggle weakened, and it fell down with a wail, twitching as it died.